When Timothée Chalamet was cast as Willy Wonka in the 2023 prequel film, fans were divided. Could the indie darling pull off the iconic chocolate maker? But the costume designer who worked on the production for 9 months saw something far more concerning than whether he'd nail the character. She watched Timothée undergo a transformation that went beyond acting. A shift that seemed to follow a pattern. A pattern that had affected every actor who'd ever played Willy Wonka. Gene Wilder, Johnny Depp, and now Timothée. This is the story of the Wonka curse. And once you understand what happened on that set, you'll see why Timothée's recent public appearances feel so unsettling. Why his eyes look different. Why his energy has changed. And why some who worked with him believe he didn't just play Wonka. He inherited something from the role. Something that doesn't let go. The costume designer had worked in film for over 20 years. She dressed actors for biopics, fantasy epics, period dramas. She understood transformation. But when she started research for Wonka, she discovered something that made her uneasy. Every actor who'd played Willy Wonka had reported strange experiences during and after production. Gene Wilder, who originated the role in 1971, talked in interviews about feeling haunted by the character, about dreams where he couldn't tell if he was Gene or Wonka, about the purple coat feeling like it had a life of its own. He eventually donated the costume to a museum because he said he couldn't have it in his house anymore. Johnny Depp, who played Wonka in Tim Burton's 2005 version, had a complete creative breakdown during filming. He became reclusive, started wearing the character's mannerisms in real life. The pale makeup, the odd speech patterns, the unsettling smile. Cast members from that production later said Depp seemed possessed by something during filming, that he wasn't himself. And after the movie, Depp's career and personal life spiraled. Divorce, lawsuits, public breakdowns. Some attributed it to personal choices. But those close to the production whispered about the curse, about how Wonka changes people, consumes them. The costume designer tried to dismiss these stories as Hollywood mythology, actors being dramatic, coincidences blown out of proportion. But then she met Timothée. The first fitting was in early 2022. Timothée arrived looking like himself. Curly hair, slim build, that boyish charm. They discussed the costume, the purple coat, the top hat, the cane. Timothée was excited, professional, normal. But when he put on the full costume for the first time, something shifted. The designer saw it in his face. A flicker, like someone else looking through his eyes for just a second. Timothée blinked, shook his head, smiled, and said, "This feels right. Like I've worn this before." The comment stuck with the designer. Because Timothée had never played this role before. Had never even been in a musical. But he said it with such certainty. Such strange familiarity. Like the costume recognized him. Or he recognized it. Over the next few weeks, the fittings continued. And each time Timothée wore the Wonka costume, he stayed in it longer. Would walk around the studio in full wardrobe. Practice scenes. Sing to himself. The designer noticed he seemed reluctant to take it off. Would find excuses to keep it on. Just want to get used to it. Need to feel the movement. Let me try one more thing. Production began in September 2022. The designer was on set daily, managing costume changes and repairs. And from day one, Timothée was different. He arrived early. Always requested to be in the Wonka costume, even for scenes that didn't require it. He'd wear it during lunch breaks, during rehearsals, during meetings. And when he was in costume, his entire demeanor changed. He became more theatrical, more eccentric, more detached from reality. At first, everyone assumed it was method acting, getting into character, but it never stopped. Even when cameras weren't rolling. even when the director called cut. Timothée stayed Wonka. The designer started noticing physical changes. Timothy's face looked paler, even without makeup. His eyes seemed larger, more intense. He lost weight rapidly. His already slim frame became gaunt. Costume pieces had to be taken in weekly. When the designer expressed concern, Timothée laughed it off. Wonka needs to look otherworldly, not quite human. But the designer hadn't told him to lose weight. The script didn't call for it. This was Timothy's choice. Or something else's influence. Then there were the dreams. Multiple crew members reported having nightmares during production. Vivid, disturbing dreams about chocolate factories. About being trapped in candy-colored rooms. About a man in a purple coat who smiled but whose eyes were empty. The designer had them too. Dreams where she was sewing the Wonka costume, but the fabric was alive. Moving under her hands. Breathing. And when she looked up, Timothée was standing there, but it wasn't Timothée. It was something wearing his face. She'd wake up gasping, heart racing. And she wasn't alone. The makeup artist, the cinematographer, even extras, all reporting similar nightmares. One day, the designer arrived on set early. The soundstage was empty, or so she thought. She heard singing, a voice echoing through the space. She followed it to the chocolate factory set, and there was Timothée, alone, in full costume, dancing and singing to no one. No cameras, no director, no audience. Just him and the empty set. The designer watched from the shadows. And what she saw chilled her. Timothée wasn't rehearsing. He was performing. Fully. Completely. Like he was entertaining an invisible crowd. And his movements were too perfect. Too precise. Like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Like he knew choreography that hadn't been created yet. The designer cleared her throat. Timothée spun around. For a moment, his face was blank. Then recognition flooded in. He smiled. That Wonka smile. Just getting in the zone, he said. But his voice sounded different. Slightly off. Like someone doing an impression of Timothée rather than Timothée himself. The designer asked if he was okay. Timothée tilted his head, stared at her, and said, "I've never been better. I finally understand what this role is. It's not about playing Wonka. It's about becoming him. Letting him in." That phrase, letting him in. It haunted the designer. Because it suggested Wonka was something separate. Something external. Something that could enter. She tried to talk to the director. To express her concerns. But he dismissed them. Timothée's committed. That's what we need. This is going to be an incredible performance. And it was. Timothée's performance on screen was magical. Captivating. He embodied Wonka perfectly. But the designer knew the cost. She'd watched him lose himself piece by piece. The costume had its own strangeness. The purple coat was a replica of the original 1971 design. Made with fabrics sourced from the same suppliers. Dyed with similar processes. And from the moment it was completed, it felt wrong. The designer couldn't explain it. The coat was just fabric and thread. But it had weight. Presence. She'd walk past it on the rack and feel watched. Other costume pieces didn't have this quality. But the Wonka coat did. And whenever Timothée wore it, he transformed. Not just in performance. In essence, midway through production, Timothée started talking about Wonka like he was real. Like he was a person Timothée had met. He'd say things like, "Wonka showed me how to play this scene. Wonka doesn't like when I do it that way. Wonka wants the hat at this angle." The crew laughed it off. Eccentric actor stuff. But the designer noticed Timothée wasn't joking. He was serious. Reverent. Like he was channeling something. Or someone. There was an incident during a night shoot. They were filming in the chocolate room. Elaborate set. Rivers of prop chocolate. Candy trees. Whimsical machinery. Beautiful but eerie under the stage lights. Timothée was in costume. Mid-scene. And suddenly he stopped. Stood completely still. Eyes glazed. The director called to him. No response. Someone touched his shoulder. Timothée jerked back. Blinked. And when he spoke, his voice was different. Older. More theatrical. He said, "The chocolate must flow. It's the only thing that matters. The chocolate and the children. Always the children." Then he collapsed. Paramedics were called. Timothée came to quickly. Said he felt dizzy. Dehydrated. Needed rest. Production shut down for the day. But the designer heard what he'd said. The way he'd said it. It wasn't Timothée. It was Wonka. Or something pretending to be Wonka. And the phrase, "always the children," echoed with sinister undertones. Because in the Wonka story, children are punished. Transformed. Disappeared. And the way Timothée said it suggested something hungry. Something that fed on innocence. The designer started researching the original Wonka story. Roald Dahl's book. The 1971 film. And she found disturbing details. Dahl had connections to occultism. Interest in dark fairy tales. The Wonka character himself is morally ambiguous. Charismatic but cruel. Generous but manipulative. A trickster figure. And in folklore, tricksters aren't just characters. They are archetypes. Energies. Entities. What if Wonka wasn't just a fictional character? What if he was a mask for something older? Something that fed on performance and attention and the souls of those who portrayed him? The designer knew this sounded insane. But she'd seen too much to dismiss it. She started noticing symbols on set. Hidden in the production design. Spirals. Circles within circles. Patterns that appeared in the wallpaper. In the candy designs. In the chocolate river's flow. Symbols that appeared in occult texts. Symbols associated with transformation. With sacrifice. With entities that existed between worlds. She asked the production designer about them. He said they were just aesthetic choices. Whimsy. But the designer saw how they were placed. Deliberately. Ritualistically. Like the entire set was a sigil. A summoning space. Timothy's behavior became more erratic. He started refusing to break character. Even off set. He'd go to his trailer in full Wonka costume and makeup. He'd eat meals as Wonka. Take phone calls as Wonka. Interact with fans as Wonka. His publicist tried to intervene. Suggested he needed rest. Distance from the role. But Timothée refused. Said he couldn't stop now. That he was too close to understanding. Understanding what? He never clarified. The designer witnessed a conversation between Timothée and his co-star. They were discussing a scene. And Timothée said, "Wonka's been waiting for me. All this time. Through Jean. Through Johnny. Waiting for the right vessel. And I'm it. I'm the one who'll finally get it right." The co-star laughed nervously. Tried to make a joke. But Timothée didn't laugh. He just stared. That empty Wonka stare. And the co-star later told the designer, "I don't think Timothy's okay. I think something's really wrong." Production wrapped in December 2022. The designer expected Timothée to shed the role. To go back to being himself. But he didn't. Months passed. The designer followed his public appearances. Red carpets. Interviews. Social media posts. And Timothée was still different. He dyed his hair a reddish brown. Started wearing purple. Spoke in a theatrical manner. Made odd jokes. His eyes had that Wonka glint. That knowing, unsettling sparkle. Fans noticed too. Comments flooded in. Why does Timothée seem so weird now? He's not the same since Wonka. Something's off. The designer tried to reach out. Sent a message through mutual contacts. Asked if Timothée wanted to talk. about the experience, about the role, about anything. She got a response. But it didn't sound like Timothy. It was formal, distant. Thank you for your concern. The role was transformative in the best way. I found a new part of myself. Or perhaps an old part that was always there. The message ended with, Wonka sends his regards. The designer stared at that last line. Wonka sends his regards. Like Wonka was separate. Like Wonka was still present. She started connecting with others who'd worked on previous Wonka productions. A makeup artist from the 2005 film. A set decorator from the 1971 version. And they all had similar stories. Actors who changed. Who never fully came back. Gene Wilder had become reclusive after Wonka. Stopped taking big roles. Talked about feeling used up. Johnny Depp's life had unraveled. And now Timothy. Different circumstances. Different eras. But the same pattern. The same curse. The designer found old interviews with Gene Wilder. In one from the 1980s, a journalist asked if he'd ever play Wonka again. Wilder's face went dark. He said, I couldn't if I wanted to. That role took something from me. And I don't think I'd survive giving it anything more. The journalist laughed. Thought he was being dramatic. But Wilder was serious. Haunted. And then he said something chilling. Wonka isn't a character. He's a door. And once you open it, things come through. The designer showed this interview to a colleague who studied folklore. He listened to her story. The dreams. The symbols. The transformations. And he said, You're describing a servitor. An entity created through collective belief and repeated performance. Every time someone plays Wonka, they feed it. Give it energy. And it grows stronger. Takes more from each actor. Eventually, it won't need actors anymore. It'll just be. The designer didn't know if she believed in servitors. In thought forms. In entities born from fiction. But she believed what she'd witnessed. She'd watched Timothée Chalamet enter that role as himself and exit as something else. She'd seen the costume exert influence. The set radiate wrongness. The performance consume the performer. And she knew that when the Wonka movie premiered, when millions of people watched Timothy's portrayal, they'd be feeding it too. Feeding whatever Wonka had become. Whatever lived behind the purple coat and the top hat and the smile. The premiere happened in December 2023. The designer attended. Sat in the dark theater. Watched Timothy on screen. And he was brilliant. Mesmerizing. Every bit the perfect Wonka. But she couldn't enjoy it. Because she knew the cost. She knew what he'd lost. What he'd given up. What had taken root inside him. And when the credits rolled and the audience applauded, she felt sick. Because they had no idea. They thought they were watching a performance. They didn't realize they were witnessing a possession. After the premiere, Timothy gave interviews. Press tour. Promotion. And in every interview, he talked about how Wonka changed him. How the role opened doors in his understanding of performance. How he felt connected to something larger than himself now. Journalists ate it up. Called it artistic evolution. But the designer heard something else. She heard someone who'd been hollowed out. Who'd become a vessel for something that wasn't entirely human anymore. She tried one last time to warn someone. Wrote to Timothy's management. To the studio. To people who could intervene. She explained what she'd seen. What she'd researched. What she believed was happening. The responses were dismissive. Thank you for your concern. Timothy is fine. This is just his process. One person was more direct. If you continue spreading these theories, we'll pursue legal action for defamation. So the designer stopped. Went quiet. Deleted her messages. And watched from a distance, but she kept researching. Kept digging. And she found something that made everything worse. The Wonka character isn't just in movies. He's in theme parks. musicals, merchandise, video games, everywhere. And every iteration feeds the same energy, the same entity. Wonka has transcended fiction, become a cultural icon, a figure that exists in the collective unconscious. And the more we celebrate him, the more we consume media about him, the stronger he gets. The more actors he can claim. The designer learned about something called an egregore, a collective thought form created and sustained by groups of people. Religions have them, corporations have them, and apparently, so do fictional characters. Wonka is an egregore, fed by decades of films, books, plays, and the psychic energy of millions of fans. And actors who portray him become conduits, channels through which the egregore can manifest more fully. They offer themselves. And it takes. She started seeing the pattern extend beyond Wonka. Other cursed roles. Other characters that seem to consume their actors. Heath Ledger and the Joker. Bela Lugosi and Dracula. Actors who became synonymous with characters to the point where the character overtook their identity. Where the line between person and role blurred until it vanished. And those actors paid prices. Mental breakdowns. Addiction. Early death. The designer wondered how many of these were coincidences and how many were something darker. Timothy's career continued. He booked more roles. Big projects. But the designer noticed he was different in all of them now. His performances had a Wonka quality. That theatrical edge. That otherworldly presence. Like he couldn't turn it off anymore. Like Wonka had become his baseline. His default. And maybe that would serve him well as an actor. Maybe he'd win awards. Become even more famous. But at what cost? Who was Timothée Chalamet now? Did he even exist anymore? Or was he just a puppet for whatever had come through during Wonka? The designer is speaking now because she believes people deserve to know. That when you watch that movie, when you celebrate that performance, you are participating in something. Something old. Something hungry. Something that feeds on attention and belief and the willingness of talented people to sacrifice themselves for art. She's not asking anyone to boycott the film. She's not demanding it be pulled from theaters. She's simply asking people to be aware. To understand that entertainment isn't always innocent. That some stories carry weight. That some characters are more than characters. She wants people to look at Timothy and see not just a rising star, but a warning. A cautionary tale about the cost of complete immersion. About what happens when you invite something in and can't get it back out. About the price of becoming someone else so thoroughly that you forget who you were. And she hopes that somewhere, somehow, Timothy can find his way back. Can separate from Wonka. Can reclaim himself. But she's not optimistic. Because she's seen this before. Watched it happen to others. And none of them ever fully recovered. The Wonka curse is real. Not as a supernatural force necessarily, though that's possible. But as a psychological pattern. A template of transformation that consumes. And Timothée Chalamet walked into it willingly. Put on the purple coat. Stepped into the chocolate factory. Became Wonka. And somewhere along the way, he forgot to take the costume off. Forgot to come back. Forgot that it was supposed to be pretend. And now he's trapped. Living inside a role that never ends. Performing for an audience that never leaves. And the designer who watched it happen can only hope that one day, someone will see what she saw. Understand what she understands. And find a way to break the curse. Before the next actor puts on the coat. Before the next Wonka is chosen. Before the entity feeds again.